We are in a functional analogy of a world war. How long it will take, I don't know. But as all world wars, it will lead to a new world order. Everyone is fighting a war for peace on his own conditions. But when that red line is crossed, I can say one thing. I would quote President Putin from 2018, when Putin said that we don't care a world if it does not include Russia. We don't care about the world in which Russia does not exist.
Is President Putin under pressure by those who wish a more aggressive approach?
Against the current, about the person. Welcome to Against the Current. We present viewpoints and perspectives that the propaganda media choose to hide. It is the curse of the times when madmen lead the blind, wrote William Shakespeare in his play Richard III. Is that line still relevant today? That's what I'll be discussing with one of Russia's leading political scientists, Professor Dmitri Trenin, head of research and scientific director at the Institute for Military Economics at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, and one of the most prominent scholars at the World Economy Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences.
Welcome, Professor Trenin.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming up into the program and joining the show. I just quoted for my German viewers William Shakespeare, Richard III. "'Tis the time's plague, when madmen lead the blind." Do we have today madmen, and who are the blind?
Well, there's another version of that idea, which is the blind leaders of the blind. So you can choose between mad leaders and blind leaders. I think it's important for the people to open their eyes and not to be blind. And then probably they can change their leaders. So I wouldn't start with the leaders. I would start with the followers, so that those followers have a much better understanding who leads them and where they are being led.
Let's have a glimpse on the situation in Germany. You worked as an officer of the Russian army in Germany in the times of the GDR, and you know my country very good. So what made people blind?
Well, I think what makes people blind is different in different situations, and we thought initially that what makes people blind is that they are not educated, that they are not aware of what's happening around them, that they are easily manipulated by their leaders. And that was the case in totalitarian societies. But the longer I live, the more I question my former beliefs. And currently, I tend to think that in many cases, and that applies very much to the affluent societies around the world, that you may be more or less satisfied with the world around you, and you stop caring about the bigger things. You are focused primarily on what concerns you in particular, and you can have a high level of you may have a high living standard, and you may be pretty complacent about what's happening, and you kind of delegate to others, to your leaders or supposed leaders the bigger issues, and that includes war and peace, unless that war starts to concern you in a very direct manner. So if, for example, you live in a well-regulated society, and the country where you live starts a military campaign somewhere thousands of miles away from your country, and you have an all-volunteer army, and you do not expect to be killed or maimed by a war that's getting started. And basically, you only care about the gas prices at the filling stations. That's all you care about. And that closing of people's minds, I think, occurs in affluent societies, maybe in a more systematic and in a let's say more systematic way than it occurs in poorer societies, where things like that immediately get your attention because they start to concern you directly. You are mobilized, you're sent to the front line, so you do care about these things. But when it's somebody else, you just you pay little attention.
In a century of nuclear danger, would you say Europeans are sleeping into the abyss, and at the same time, their leaders are acting in a state of apocalyptic blindness?
Well, let's look at the leaders now. The leaders of European countries are those people who pass for leaders in those countries, because my view is that today's leaders in the EU countries, in the UK, are mostly frontmen or front figures. They can change at a very fast pace, like what's happening in the UK right now. I don't know. There's a cat at 10 Downing Street, who has seen 6 or 7 prime ministers on his watch. The prime minister's cat. The cat remains. The prime ministers come and go. You wonder how you can manage a country, and the answer is that there's somebody else who actually does the job of ruling. Now, I think that in terms of security policy and foreign policy more broadly, Europe, I wouldn't say it has been asleep at the wheel, because Europe has not been at the wheel. Europe has been in the back seat, and the wheel was managed by the United States. And that was not an act of oppression. The Europeans were happy to delegate their foreign policies, their security policies, to the great ally, the United States, after the end of the Second World War, so that they could do nicer things like economics, well-being, pensions, and other very important things. But somebody else managed their international relations. It had some sense in the Cold War under the bipolar system, because Europe was not a pole. The United States had the hegemony over the western half of Europe and the western half of Germany. But now, more than 8 decades later, when the Europeans are talking about their strategic autonomy, they have to recognize at the very beginning that they have to learn, maybe relearn, the art of statecraft. And when they come try to come to the fore of international politics and try to reconsolidate the European Union using Russia as a bogeyman, and when they are attempting to make the European Union stronger in the face of the Russian threat, the so-called Russian threat, they are prone to make mistakes that can become fatal, because they, as I said, they have unlearned the art of statecraft, and they think that they can provoke the country that they call their greatest threat without much danger to themselves. But each time they're doing it, they're courting their danger more and more. And one of those provocations could really become fatal. When I'm asked how a war may erupt in Europe, I don't think of a Napoleon-style or Hitler-style invasion of Russia from the West. And I certainly know that Russia has no plans and no interest to invade Europe. But one provocation may be one too many. You board a ship, you blockade Kaliningrad, you try to blockade St. Petersburg, you shoot down a plane, or even a drone, and this can start a chain of events that could lead to a real war between Russia and Europe. And I'm very concerned that the Europeans have at the same time built Russia as a big threat, and at the same time they stop really fearing Russia. So Russia is not to be feared, so it can be provoked, it can be held in check, it could be reduced to the size and shape that the Europeans would think would satisfy their view of where Russia should be and what Russia should be. And as I said, one provocation may turn out to be one too many, and that could start something that no one really wants.
In Germany, we have a member of parliament of the Christian Democratic Union, Roderich Kiesewetter. And he recently told the press, we must make Russia surrender. What do you think about that?
Well, I've read that statement. I think I've seen that in the Focus magazine. And I think it's mad. It's crazy. It's something that if I'm not a voter in Germany, but to me that would disqualify a person like that from any position of power and influence in any country, because that is, there's a word Brandstifter, and I think he's exactly that. It's crazy, really crazy. I wouldn't comment on that, but I've read all the arguments that he rolled out in support of his plea, and I think that the guy belongs somewhere else other than the Bundestag.
We have a foreign minister, Johann Wadefuhl. I know him very well for 20 years. And he recently said, Russia will be our enemy forever. How do you evaluate those quotes are European and especially German leaders preparing a war against Russia?
Well, again, I feel sorry for the foreign minister. I think I'm more in tune with a former prime minister of the United Kingdom who said that, I'm talking about Lord Palmerston, who famously said that there are no eternal friends and no eternal enemies. Russia and Germany have been enemies in the past, but they also been friends. I was stunned when I was a young officer in Potsdam, in those days the GDR. And in Potsdam, there's a place called Kapellenberg. And on top of that hill, there's a church to the Saint Prince Alexander Nevsky, who in Russian history is a very, very important figure. And he is known for many things, and one of the things that stand out in his record is the defeat of German knights when they prepared to attack the Russian city of Pskov on the Chudskaya Lake. And of course, this is what every Russian would know about Alexander Nevsky. But that church bore a plaque, and the plaque said, "This church is a Denkmal der russisch-preußischen Freundschaft." And and the plaque dates back to 1913. And that was exactly the centenary of the alliance between Prussia and Russia against Napoleonic France. So the Russians and the Germans have been allies in some wars. They were enemies in other wars. But above all, they were neighbors, fairly close neighbors. And they had a lot of interaction over the centuries, in particular since the 18th century. And one of the most illustrious, most famous, and most loved, I would say, Russian monarchs, Catherine the Great, was an ethnic German. But she endeared herself to her Russian subjects. And she was the epitome of a successful Russian leader. So it's a very involved relationship. And to reduce it to Feindschaft is not very intelligent, in my view.
In the beginning of our conversation, you told me, first we have to focus not on the leaders, but on the people. In the regional elections in Baden-Württemberg in Germany, 2/3 of the voters voted for warmonger parties, the Green Party and the Conservative Party. So can we set our hopes into the people?
Well, I think we should, because if I wouldn't call it necessarily democracy, because democracy has many meanings and all that. But I would say that legitimate rule in all countries requires support of the people. Whether countries are branded today in the West democratic or authoritarian, any government can only be in power as long as the people it governs actually support that rule. And I think that it's really, really of absolute importance that the people in Germany, in Russia, in everywhere around the world have a better understanding of what's happening around them, including foreign policy, because foreign policy in affluent societies is mostly an afterthought. It's an afterthought in the United States, where, in fact, the United States is not affected by wars happening thousands of miles away from North America. So they trust the government to do things, and when they make mistakes, they make mistakes, and but those mistakes do not really endanger the lives of the vast majority of the people. Similarly, in Europe, as I said a minute ago, that European governments were happy to leave foreign affairs and defense to the great ally, the United States, so that the European governments could do economic and social issues. And the people who vote, they normally vote for those who promise them better livelihood, better living conditions, better working conditions, better pensions, better whatever. Foreign policy is, in today's Europe, is mostly an afterthought. Unless, of course, you mobilize the mainstream media, as it happens right now in Europe, to build a bogeyman out of a neighboring country, i.e. Russia today. It has, in my view, it has several. It gets, or rather, it produces important benefits for the elites, reconsolidating the union, relaunching the economy via militarization, and making sure that the current elites remain in power. Not necessarily the current leadership, that's not important, but the elites remain in power. And importantly, anyone who questions the authority of those elites, or their right to lead the blind, if you like, is immediately branded Putin supporter. Used to be Putin Versteher, now it's something different, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing. So it's very clever on behalf of the elites, but the people should see through that. The people should understand that the elites are engaged in a pretty risky game that can lead to something that no one, including the elites, no one really wants, because the elites are painting two things at the same time. It's very interesting. I cannot reconcile myself to that image, but at the same time, the elites are building Russia as a bogeyman, as a very big threat that can endanger the freedom of all of Europe. And at the same time, they paint a picture of a very weak Russia that is ready to unravel. So it's not to be feared. It's something that is, it's an oxymoron, if you like. You cannot marry those two into a single thing. And yet, if you read today's mainstream media in Europe, you get precisely that picture. It's a big threat, a very big threat, barbarians at the door. Then at the same time, they're not to be feared. They will not use their nukes. They know better. They will just unravel. They will do what the Soviet Union did. They will just cease to exist and let us shape the future for them, the future that we in Europe would prefer to have on our eastern flank. So that's very interesting, but that's also very dangerous.
And mainstream media in the West are following the narratives of the governments. But when political leaders are only frontmen, who are the men behind?
Well, it's a very important question. I think that there's a notion called deep state. Interestingly, anyone in the past who would use an expression like this one would be immediately branded an adherent of a conspiracy theory. And that is a very effective way of making people stop thinking and stop thinking behind the frontmen. There's a myth of democracy. That's why I didn't spend too much time talking about democracy. But democracy, as it's practiced right now, in my view, in Europe and in the United States, is manipulation of society by an oligarchy. So what the ordinary people are given is a choice which is not really a choice. It is a fake choice, and the mainstream media, who I think that they like the government, are the agents of those who really own countries in today's West. I'm talking about the elites that are diverse, and yet, as we see now, they can very well mobilize. They can mobilize their men and women in government. They can mobilize their men and women in the media. They can mobilize those who are asking the right questions, so that polling companies come up with the notion of support for the narratives that the governments and the media spread. It's a very well working mechanism of governing that passes for democracy, except that it's not a democracy in the sense that it's people who rule. People in that system are a mass that can be and is manipulated. There are questions about who will manipulate better, and that's what the elections are all about. And those who manipulate the ordinary people better, as a prize, they get positions in government, they get positions in government, in parliaments, etc.
And in the media, would you agree if I say those elites in media, in economy, in politics, have one thing in common? They are transatlantic corrupted.
Well, transatlanticism is a reality, and in other words, this is the same thing as Western elites. The political West came into being at the end of the Second World War. Prior to that, the elites in Europe or in the various European countries were national elites. They did have some connections among themselves in Europe. They had some connections with their brethren in the United States and North America more generally, but they were still national at the core. What happened with the arrival of NATO in 1949 and Montanunion in 1950, the European Economic Community in 1957 was the formation of a transatlantic elite. Now, this transatlantic elite is the people who actually rule the West. It's not that they all agree on all issues. Of course, they do not. They have their different interests, their competing interests. But on some issues, like today, we're talking about Russia, we're talking about China. On some issues, those elites come together. Of course, it's easier to come together on Russia because the dependence on Russia in energy relations has been ruined recently, and at some cost. Maybe Germany bore the most of that cost. It's more difficult with China, but I think geopolitics trumps geoeconomics at the time when the elites feel a big danger, and I think they do feel endangered right now. This is, we're living, we must realize that we're living in the transition period that ends decades of U.S. hegemony, first in the West or in the non-communist world, and then in the entire world. And it's also transition from Western dominance, which is roughly 500 years old, and it's a passage to something very different. It's passing to a period in human history which is not fully there, but whose shape we can see even today, when non-Western countries seeking to become on a par with the West. And they're winning in many cases. China, of course, is at the front of that development. There's India, there are other countries in various non-Western areas. And Russia, which at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, which was the result of Russia's domestic developments and mismanagement by the communist elite, it sought Russia to become part of the West, only to be rejected in its claim to be a co-equal of other big nations in the West, primarily the United States, but also the principal nations of the European Union. Russia was essentially offered a status of an associated territory. Call it, if you want to use old descriptions, semi-colony of the West. That was the offer from the West to Russia, which Russia rejected, and then it joined forces with non-Western nations. And it's a very important, cardinally important period for the Western elites. They are losing control of many things. And there is nothing that they would not do to stop this or reverse, if they can, reverse this trend. So we're talking about what I would call a functional analogy of a world war. That's what we're going through. The Third World War did not happen due to nuclear deterrence, mutual nuclear deterrence. So it's behind us. A direct nuclear war between Russia and the United States, or China and the United States, is unlikely because of the continuing relevance of nuclear deterrence at that level. But still, the issue is the same as it was, and it is in a world war. What is the world order? And there is a clash between those who support the old order of U.S. hegemony, Western dominance, and those who seek a multipolar order or polycentric order, or an order where different civilizations find a way to coexist and do business among themselves on an equal footing. That's what we're going through, and that's cardinally important for the Western elite. So they will not stop at anything in their quest to stop the trends or reverse them.
Did I get it right? That the Western elites prefer to prepare and to wage a war instead of accepting their own decline?
Yes, but we must also realize that when you say they are prepared to wage a war, they still hope that the war will not affect them directly, or will not affect those among them who would be in a more senior position in the Western world. Just to give you an example, the West doesn't give a damn about Ukraine or the Ukrainian people. Ukrainians and Russians to them are indistinguishable, and actually, in many ways, they are indistinguishable. That's why you have a tragic clash between two Russian armies. One called the Russian Federation Army, the other one called the Armed Forces of Ukraine. They speak the same language. They act on more or less the same mentality. I'm putting Ukrainian nationalists a little bit to one side because they're not the majority in Ukraine. And if things get a little bit out of hand, I don't think that the United States really care much about the Baltic countries. Or even, I don't know about Poland because of Polish element in American society, but let's say Romania. Do they care about Romania? A clash between Russia and Germany would be a boon for many in the Anglo-Saxon world, because those are the two forces historically.
They can weaken both sides.
Yes, exactly. I mean, as Harry Truman said back in June 1941, if Germany prevails, we should help Russia. If Russia prevails, we should help Germany, so that they kill each other as much as they can. That's Harry S. Truman, who in 1945 became the President of the United States of America. And it's that's the gist of the Anglo-Saxon attitude to Russia and Germany. So if the war spreads, God forbid, but if the war in Ukraine spreads all the way to Germany, not everyone in the United States, not everyone in the United Kingdom or France would be unhappy.
And is this a reason for the Trump administration to Europeanize the Ukraine war?
Well, from the standpoint of Trump and the people in his administration, Russia is not a threat to the United States. It's not a competitor. China is. The United States has finite resources. The United States cannot be everywhere. You know, we would recall President Kennedy back in 1963 saying we will be, 1961, I think, we will spare no effort to uphold the cause of freedom anywhere in the world, right? That was the heyday of American hegemony. But in today's world, the United States has to be much more judicious about the resources at its disposal and the use of those resources. So the United States wants to focus on China. It wants to subcontract Russia, a minor threat, well, not really a threat, because the United States does not believe that Russia will seek to annihilate the United States of America physically, as Russia can. But they don't think that Russia will do that. And they're right. So Europe can manage it. This is what was written in the U.S. National Defense Strategy. which basically said this is Russia is a persistent threat that can be managed by the Europeans. They don't require us, the Americans. They have a GDP that's 10 times bigger than Russia's, and so many more people, 3 times, 4 times more people than there are, 3 times than there are in Russia. I think that they would want the Europeans to continue to press Russia, to hold Russia down. And interestingly, the United States basically said it, that they will not come to the rescue of the Europeans if something happens. America, even during the Cold War, when I was serving, as you mentioned, in Germany, both in East Germany and in West Berlin, and I had discussions with Western military counterparts and also with some Germans in the West. And the Germans I spoke at that time with, they doubted whether the United States would risk losing Chicago for Hamburg. So that was clear to the Germans in those days. We're talking the end of the 70s and the early 80s. That the famous Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty was a myth. I mean, the article is not a myth, but its interpretation that the United States would come to the rescue of any part of the free world, any part of NATO, in case of a Russian attack, and would risk a nuclear war against the Soviet Union if the Soviet Union invaded any part of Europe. That was always a myth. And during the Americans, during the Cold War, came up with a fine doctrine of a limited nuclear war. And the limited nuclear war was to be limited essentially to West and East Germany. If you look at the maps that people used during the exercises, the Soviet territory for Americans in those exercises was sacred, not to be touched. So that American territory is not touched by Soviet missiles. But anywhere in Germany, or the Warsaw Pact and parts of NATO territory in Europe, that was fair game. You could strike targets there anywhere, as long as you did not touch the territory of your principal adversary.
So the outcome of all what you said is it would be an advantage for Washington to bring Germany and Europe as a whole into a new war of attrition against Russia. How far are we from the order, the Germans to the front?
Well, I still would say that I hope that it doesn't come to a direct war. And I still believe that it can be prevented, and cooler heads will prevail on the Western side. I say on the Western side because I give zero credence to any idea of Russia posing a threat to any country in NATO. And I believe that for the United States, a war of attrition between Russia and Europe would not be such a bad thing, because Russia would be occupied with Europe, Europe would be occupied with Russia, Europe for the Trump administration, and I would say more broadly for the American elites. Despite all this transatlantic stuff we were talking about just a few minutes ago, Europe is a competitor. And if Europe's economic power is reduced, so much better for the United States, because things have changed with the Trump administration, not because of Trump, but because of the change in the status of the United States in this world. So basically, the United States is no longer acting as the leader of the free world with all the interests of the free world integrated into the broader American interest. No longer. It's not the Cold War. But even in the Cold War, as we were just discussing, that was not precisely the case. But it's absolutely not the case right now. So Europe, it's not about NATO anymore. It's not about the free world. It's not about the West even. If you read what the Trump administration officials are talking about, their talking points don't include many references to the West. It's all about the United States. It's America first. America, not the West. And it is in the interest of America to see some of the resources of Europe flow in America's direction. Europe, essentially, if Europe is at war with Russia or is under threat from Russia, then it's not very safe to invest there, is it? So come to the U.S. Welcome. We want you here. And as I understand, a number of German companies have relocated or established their presence in the United States and funneled their resources to the U.S. shore as the safer shore than the eastern shore of the Atlantic. So it's not a bad idea for the United States as long as it doesn't involve the United States in any real war between NATO and Russia, because in that war the United States may be affected, and Mr. Putin actually is sending messages to the U.S. In a subtle way and suggesting that when push comes to shove, you guys will not be able to use your European allies to do critical damage to us. You will be held responsible for that as well. So you guys need to think harder about tackling the Russia issue.
But they don't. The Americans are losing their worldwide dominance, and now they are trying to cut claims. And the European, not allies, we are vassals, are exploited in a stronger way. For example, by gas delivery, whose high prices, and losing the cheap Russian energy possibilities. Yes. Would you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. But that's we discussed a minute ago that the United States saw and still sees the European Union as a competitor, the United Kingdom into the bargain. And all European countries are competitors, collective competitor of the United States. So severing their energy relations with Russia and switching over their energy dependence to the United States is a huge boon for American power. And I think that that is something where the United States won a major battle in the competition against Europe, primarily Germany. And if Germany switches from building cars to building tanks to be used in a war with Russia, so much the better.
In a secret paper of Rand Corporation, which is paid by US military, can be read that the only way to make the American economy stronger is to start a war in Ukraine for forcing the Europeans to buy American fracking gas and to cut them away from the Russian energy deliveries. Is that right?
Well, I think that's already done. That's mission accomplished. Congratulations.
If this is done, which role plays the financial industry? Is this a secret driver of this process? And should we more be focused on the events in London, in the financial district of London?
Well, it's a very interesting question because I think that modern capitalism, modern since the 1980s, I would say, is dominated by finance. It's a very different kind of capitalism from the industrial capitalism that we saw before that. So this post-industrial society is a society where the economy is essentially financialized. And we were talking earlier about the elites who run the show, and I would say that the elites who run the show are no longer these captains of industry. It's the guys who manage the money. They are the real masters of the universe. They sit in London, they sit in New York, they may be sitting in some other places, but those two stand out. And that explains a lot about Western policies. All this democracy, all this free press notwithstanding, those are the real masters.
The financial analyst Alex Kreiner wrote again and again, all wars are bankers' wars. And he said in some interviews, it's all about collateral. The Western capitalism and the financial industry needs new minerals as securities for old credits.
Well, I think that used to be true, and that is true today. And in that, look at the wars that the United States started this year. The war, well, it was not precisely a war, more of a special forces operation in Venezuela. And then, of course, the invasion of, not the invasion, but the attack against Iran. Those wars were waged against two leading oil producers. Oil is a very important factor. Whatever you say about the green economy, the Green Deal, good old oil, good old gas, they are still very much in play. Also, the U.S.-China economic relationship is very heavily, I wouldn't say dominated, but it's very heavily affected by this issue of rare earth metals. So it's, yes, particularly now, oil and gas may be old stuff. They're still there, but they were not discovered yesterday. But the modern computer-based economy, AI and all that, they require rare earths. And the countries where with the deposits, with the mining industry that allows you to extract those things and then manufacture actually metals out of the ore, they are precious stuff. And the Americans are very unhappy about China being the producer of the 90% of rare earth metals around the world. That gives China enormous leverage over the United States. This tariff raid by Trump was rebuffed very, very quickly by the Chinese stopping exports of their rare earth metals to the West. So yes, it's about that stuff, but also other things like fresh water, for example. This is a major issue to come, and there are nations that have large reservoirs of fresh water, including Russia. That could be a very very important in the next round of the never-ending competition. As long as we have states in the world to compete for power, influence, and other stuff, who compete for their very existence, I would say, this fight, this struggle, this competition, rivalry, whatever you call it, will continue. We have to live with that.
Is this the tragedy of great powers, like John Mearsheimer wrote?
The tragedy of great powers is that they've won one big fight. That's the fight for their very existence. The great powers are the powers that have survived, and they do not fear extinction. But as they say, solving one problem is an invitation to another. And when you have survived and when you've risen to a certain level where you do not have to fear about your existence, you have to fight you have to fight for your place in the hierarchy. And there's a never-ending fight among the countries that have risen to that level, for maintaining that level, for going up, going down, and it's there. And I think the tragedy is that in the past, those great powers always risked and always had wars among themselves. The First World War, the Second World War. It's different now because of mutual nuclear deterrence. However, people are thinking about overcoming this scourge of mutual nuclear deterrence and having a way to kill your enemy without using nukes. And people in the West are very much enthused by the example of the unraveling of the Soviet Union, this suicide of a great power. And they still hope that this can be done again. So what happens on the front line to them is of secondary importance to what happens behind the front line, to what happens within Russia. So they are still thinking about creating enough instability in Russia so that the Russian state as we know it today will cease to exist.
That brings us back to the Ukraine war. I think this war can be evaluated on three dimensions. First, the war theater, the military operations. The second one is the worldwide economic warfare. And the third level is, for me, the propaganda warfare. How do you read the situation at the front line?
Well, the front line is, I think we need to realize that it's a very different war from the wars of the past. It's very different at the level of the technology that is used, meaning that the tactics and strategy, to the extent the strategy exists on the front line, will have to be modified according to the changes in the military technology. Drone warfare has revolutionized the war in Ukraine. It's not a war as people as Western propaganda tells us. It's not a war to end Ukrainian statehood. Never was. It's not a war to win back as much territory as possible. Territory is important, but not in the way that it is normally portrayed in the Western media. It's a war where the most important thing, and I will refer to something I said just a few seconds ago, it's a war about which side is more resilient. And it's not a war between Russia and Ukraine in that sense. If Ukraine were fighting alone, and it would have stopped fighting a long time ago. But Ukraine is an instrument of Western policies today, I think, more of European policies than of American policies, but still combined policies of the West. And so far, Russia has demonstrated surprising resilience to all that. And of course, from the Russian side, you see that Ukraine has not collapsed. Ukrainian regime has not collapsed because it's helped, it's aided very heavily by the collective West, including international institutions like the IMF that gave dozens of billions of dollars to Ukraine and all that. So it's a war about which side is more resilient. It is a challenge, and at the same time, it's a stimulus. What happens on the front line is important if you look at Russia, but the more important thing is what happens within Russia. Because the Russia of 2026 is a very different Russia from the Russia of 2021, for example. It is a country that looks to itself, does not expect to be helped, aided, integrated by anyone. It's a big change from the Russian dreams in the post-communist era, when Russian leaders talked about a greater Europe or a Europe from Lisbon to Vladivostok or what have you. We thought of ourselves as being a component of this greater Europe that would be perhaps the leading power, or one of the leading powers, or leading complexes, if you like, leading units in the world to come. No longer. We were thinking about ourselves as a separate civilization that has roots in Europe, but not only in Europe, in other places as well. That is unique in that sense. And Russia has started doing things and making things that it stopped doing and making 35 years ago. As the Soviet Union, this country was able to produce almost anything, different quality, sometimes more competitive, sometimes less competitive, but it was absolutely a self-sustained economy. In today's world, you cannot be completely divorced from the rest of the global economy. That's not the case. But Russia has started building passenger planes again. Russia has started building locomotives for its rail system, rather than buying them from Siemens or others.
Going to Volgograd, we took an Airbus.
But these Airbuses are on the way out. And they will be progressively replaced by Russian planes, Russian-made planes, because if you lose, or let me put it differently, unless you recover your technological sovereignty, we're talking also things like chips and AI and many other things, you're not a major player in the world. And Russia is nothing unless it's a great power. Russia will cease to exist if it's not a great power. If it's a semi-colony of the West, as it was almost turning itself into in the wake of the Soviet collapse, then there's no Russia. You will, at some point, even the territorial unity of the place will be abolished. Different areas will tend to go to different poles of attraction. But Russia is getting consolidated internally. That's important. The value system is being revised away from the near total reliance on money and anything that has anything to do with money. and there are other non-material values that are coming to the fore. There's a different system of education in the works. There are many things, fundamental things that have happened in the past, just think of it, in the past 4.5 years. That's more important than where the actual front line in Ukraine, or what used to be Ukraine, whatever you call it, goes. And if Russia is successful in all that, and I'm positive on it, then decades from now, there'll be a different Russia with a very different outlook from both its post-Soviet and pre-Soviet and Soviet predecessors. So it's a country it's a work in progress, what's happening in Russia.
The drone warfare you mentioned caused a lot of damage at Russian oil and gas production facilities and transport facilities like Ust-Luga. How hard is this damage?
Well, it's difficult for me to assess this damage. Of course, we're in wartime, and no authoritative figures or information has been released to the public. So I don't know. If I knew, I wouldn't say it because of obvious reasons. I can say it's not trivial what's happening, this is one of the things where Ukraine is acting as an agent of the West. I think more of Europe today than of the United States. And my hunch is that when time comes when the damage that you mentioned becomes too big for Russia to sustain, then Russia will strike at the heart of its problem. Its problem with refineries and all that stuff. Its problem with drones, rather, that Ukraine is sending to Russia, because those drones are today manufactured in a number of countries, including in Germany. And it would be logical for Russian leaders to look at those targets and make sure that those who are damaging Russia will sustain some damage themselves as a way to stop this kind of aggression against Russian territory.
Is the Kremlin considering nuclear escalation?
Well, I don't think that the Kremlin at this point is thinking about striking Europe or the United States, for that matter, with nuclear weapons. But the whole issue, the whole issue of nuclear deterrence is that you never know when you cross a red line. The Western media painted a lot of red lines that were easily crossed by Ukrainian and European and American actions. But the actual red line is not to be offered from the outside. The actual red line is in the mind of the decision maker, the ultimate decision maker. And we don't know, I don't know, no one knows, except for the decision maker, where that red line may be. But when that red line is crossed, I can say one thing. I would quote President Putin from 2018, when Putin said that we don't care a world if it does not include Russia. We don't care about the world in which Russia does not exist. And I think this is a powerful statement that comes from the heart of the president, or comes from the mind of the president, or both. And I think he is absolutely there. He will not preside over a strategic defeat of Russia, which I still think is in the minds of European politicians. This is something that he will not allow. And he has the capacity, he has the power, he has everything that he needs to make sure that those who want Russia to cease to exist themselves before Russia does.
Is President Putin under pressure by those who wish a more aggressive approach?
Well, President Putin is not under pressure from anyone. His position in Russia today is totally unassailable. He listens to a lot of people. He is anything but isolated. He goes to different places. He meets with different personalities. He reads stuff. He, as a former intelligence officer, he is used to getting his information from different sources. He does not rely on any one opinion, any one source, any particular idea. He combines a lot of information, or he brings together a lot of information before he makes a decision. He is very cautious, knowing fully the power that he can wield, both inside the country and outside the country. So he is very judicious in using that power. He doesn't want to bring the world to its end. But as I said, when the commander-in-chief of Russia, that he is faced with the possibility of a strategic defeat of his country, as I said, he will follow his own words. We have no stake in the world if it does not include Russia. Absolutely no stake.
What does that mean for the Middle East and the war, the illegal war of Israel and the United States against Iran? Is Russia in a position to lose Iran? Because this is the southern flank of the north-south corridor. And can China see losing Iran as a transmission belt to the West?
Well, Russia is not, the Russian Federation is not the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is Russia, but it's Russia in a certain period of time. Russia is eternal, if you like. It can have different names. Today's name is the Russian Federation. The Soviet Union was the previous name of Russia. But the Russian Federation is not the Soviet Union. Iran is not a satellite of the Soviet Union. We're not in the business of losing Iran or winning Iran. Iran is a civilization that is over 3,000 years old. They're proud people. They look down on many others in this world. They're not Russia's vassal, and they're not China's vassal. Russia offered to include the clause of mutual military assistance in the strategic partnership treaty that was signed in January 2025. The Iranians declined. They did not want Russia to be involved in their wars, their potential wars with others. Russia was, as I said, Russia was ready to do that. Russia was ready to sign a partnership treaty with Iran along the lines of the treaty with North Korea. With North Korea, there is this mutual military assistance clause, and you saw the North Koreans fighting for Russia, in Russia. But the Iranians are a different thing. So it's not losing Iran. I would say that Iran has inflicted a defeat, a political and psychological defeat on the United States and Israel in this war. The United States has emerged from this war as a loser. And that is very important. And it did not require any outside support, certainly not from Russia and not from China, to win this war against the United States. So Iran is a much more valuable strategic partner for Russia today than it was, let's say, 2 years ago. China, I wouldn't want to characterize in detail the Chinese attitude. But as you know, their interests in the Middle East are split between their interests in Iran and their interests on the other shore of the Persian Gulf. And they are balancing. They are doing a few things to help the Iranians, but at the same time, they care a lot about their investment in the Arab countries of the Gulf. And China takes a more relaxed attitude. They did not have and never had a global empire, unlike the Soviet Union. So a place like Cuba was never an ally of China. Venezuela, which used to be a source of oil imports for China, the Chinese took that in stride. At least that's the public persona that they had over the Venezuela crisis. So it's not a defeat. If anything, it's the defeat of the United States and Israel.
Tehran closed partly the Strait of Hormuz and counterattacked the production facilities, oil and gas, in the Gulf states. What is the outcome for the world financial system?
Well, we are now witnessing essentially Iran using its quote-unquote nuclear option. It's for the first time in the conflicts involving Iran that Tehran managed to close the Strait of Hormuz. They never tried to do that before. It was always there, that threat, but it was never actualized. Now it's a fact. And the United States has not been able to break through that blockade for the fear of casualties that the American people would not sustain. That's one of the issues that we touched upon at the very beginning of our conversation. The American people would allow their president to use military force overseas as long as the casualties are light. But even though the United States had an all-volunteer force, but when the casualties start mounting, the American people would not want to continue that. And Trump knows it very well. So that's that's the point. Now, I think the big change in the financial world will come, and this is something that perhaps the United States fears more than anything else. I think it fears more than the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. If the countries of the Gulf decide that the United States is not offering any real security guarantee, that they need to think again, they need to think harder, and that the privileges that they, in the past, gave to the United States were not to be continued. Those privileges include, as the most important thing, not so much the bases, but the use of the US dollar in oil and gas-related transactions. Should they switch to some other currency, even partially, to the Chinese yuan, for example, that would be a very powerful blow to the United States. If a world oil trade is not solely made in dollars, but if another currency comes in and that currency becomes, I wouldn't say predominant, but that's significant, then American financial power will take a dip.
The French historian Emmanuel Todd wrote, "The Americans will lose their vessels step by step." How big is the danger for the Americans to lose their vessels in the Middle East?
Well, I think it's real. I'm not suggesting that it's already the case, but the American security guarantees have been exposed as hollow, just like the Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. People in the Gulf countries thought that as long as they had American bases in their territory, they were safe. In fact, the opposite happened. The American bases became magnets, attracting Iranian missiles and drones. And moreover, the countries that hosted those bases were hit as supporters of the enemy. Talking Qatar, talking the United Arab Emirates and Saudi. So it's a very powerful blow to the Persian Gulf countries. We don't know where they will end up. The story is in progress. The world will not be as it was before this war. The Middle Eastern section of the world will not be as it was before this most recent war. I don't think that the change will come very quickly, that it will be simply a switch from dependence on the United States to dependence on China. China has a very different worldview, very different pattern of foreign policy, very different from the United States. It's not a country that has many allies or is used to having allies in this world. But if they diversify geopolitically, as I think they will have to, it will be a different world. But the message is being felt everywhere. Europe, the Far East. Europe, I think, has gotten the message that the United States is not there forever, that the United States may leave them in the lurch, and they're using this opportunity because any crisis is at least half an opportunity. And they're using it for militarization, reconsolidation, using Russia as this proverbial barbarian at the gate to stimulate processes within the European Union. But Europe, that's okay for Russia, for Europe to walk away from being overly dependent on the United States. Actually, many Russians hoped in the wake of the end of the Cold War, that Europe will emerge as a separate center of power, and Russia and Europe would be able to find a mutually beneficial modus vivendi. This never happened. The Europeans preferred to remain vassals. If now they're trying to be autonomous, whatever it may mean under the present circumstances, but in the wrong way from the Russian standpoint. They're using Russia as an enemy that stimulates that internal process. But if the Europeans come back to their senses, as I hope one day they will, and act in their own well-thought-through, enlightened self-interest, whether at the national level or if the Union survives at the Union level, then there can be, a neighborly future for Russian-European relations. Not to be compared to what happened after the end of the Cold War. I don't think Russia will ever want to become a semi-colony of Europe or become just associated with Europe. Russia will be separate, will stand on its own feet, but it can have a pragmatic relationship with Europe when Europe comes back to its senses.
Overviewing the situation in the Middle East, the war against Iran, the war in Ukraine, the operations of the Americans in Venezuela, did we reach a century of forever war?
Well, we live. This is something I will repeat something I said before. We are in a functional analogy of a world war. How long it will take, I don't know. But as all world wars, it will lead to a new world order. The problem today, in a nutshell, is that we have a multipolar world. Let's say at the level of supreme national power that prioritizes military power. We have three unequal players: the United States, China, and Russia. At the economic level, we have even more players, etc. So we have a multipolar world even today, but we don't have a multipolar world order. There's no order in this. So what we're doing today, what all the big powers, medium powers are fighting about, is a kind of order that would lead to some sort of a Gleichgewicht, some sort of a stable distribution of power and influence in this world. This stability that everyone is fighting a war for peace on his own conditions. It almost never happens that way. So there may be the order that is finally established may not be ideal from various perspectives, but it will be a world of equilibrium. That's why I prefer the German word Gleichgewicht to the English word of balance. So this equilibrium, when that equilibrium is reached, I don't know whether it will happen in my lifetime. So I think it'll take longer than I expect to live. But then this functional equivalent of a world war will be over.
Der russische Politikwissenschaftler Dmitri Trenin.
The Russian political scientist Dmitri Trenin says we're living in a multipolar world, but we don't yet have a multipolar world order. And that transition is painful because the world hasn't found its inner balance yet. Thank you very much for being here.
It was a great honor for me.
Here on Against the Current, we show you positions and perspectives that the propaganda media keep hidden. Stay with us.
Bleiben Sie dabei.